I didn't have any other costumes on standby. Also, word of advice, don't order costumes from Wish. It's not a great idea. Anyway, how's it going, everyone? And happy Halloween! So I know some of you are probably wondering, where's The Last of Us? You said The Last of Us is going to be your last... I know. But since it's that time of the year, Spookum season, I wanted to try and do something a little, fun and festive. And, well, this is one of the reviews on my bucket list, and something that I was already planning on doing this year, so it was just the perfect occasion. But rest assured, I know I said I was going to do The Last of Us, and I'm still going to put that video out by the end of the year, so don't worry, it's coming. The script's being written, the game's being recorded, and hopefully by the time this video comes out, I might already be done it, but we'll see. So yeah, I'm not sure how to segue into the video, but yeah, here we go. Anybody remember Splatterhouse? It was originally a beat-em-up released in the arcades back in 1989. Developed by Namco, it was notable for its violence and graphic imagery while also being a loving tribute to the slasher films of the decade. In time it would get a home console release for the TurboGrafx 16, but also would spawn 2 more sequels for the Genesis, as well as the Japan exclusive Wanpaku Graffiti. This series was also notable for leading to the creation of the ESRB, along with games such as Mortal Kombat, for example. It's kind of crazy when you really think about it. Splatterhouse would make cameos in other games over the years, like in Tekken, Point Blank, and even Katamari. But it seemed like a true revival of the series just wasn't in the cards and was something that the fans could only dream of. Announced back in 2007, this reboot was originally being developed by Bottle Rocket, who were known for making Rise of the Kasai, a tie-in game for Solid Showdown, and were making a Flash game before it got cancelled. Anybody remember that show, by the way? During this period, Namco wasn't happy with how the game was progressing, so in early 2009, the game would be delayed to that next year and would be taken away from Bottle Rocket. There are many reasons for this decision, and I recommend you check out Matt McMuscle's video on the subject. Just by looking at the early trailers and beta footage, there is some genuine effort here, and I'm curious how things would have gone down if Bottle Rocket had been able to see it to completion. To save the project, Namco decided to finish the game in-house with help from some former Bottle Rocket staff and the Afro Samurai team. The game would release in November 2010 for PS3 and Xbox 360, and it was destroyed by the critics. But it seems it's retained some sort of a cult status over the years. I would learn of the franchise thanks to this guy, and it wasn't until recently where I was able to get a copy for myself. I've dabbled with it a little bit, but for the most part I'm going into this review relatively blind. The version I'll be looking at is for the Xbox 360, and as far as the PS3 version, I don't own it, and maybe we'll save it for a revisited episode down the line. Anyway, we ready to dive right in? Well, let's jump head first and talk about the story. Meet Rick Taylor. He's a lovable nerd, has a wicked hot girlfriend, and is currently bleeding out on the floor. Wow. Was not expecting that for an opener. Before succumbing to his injuries, a voice appears in his head which is coming from this mask telling Rick that he can give him the power to save his girl. With no other choice, Rick puts on the mask which gives him a John Cena bod, and the two protagonists set off to rescue Jennifer and stop whatever plan Dr. West has up his sleeves. The general plot is straightforward, but you could make a point that it's trying to feel similar to the original arcade game. There's more to it here, with 5 eclipses that'll bring about the apocalypse from this race known as the Corrupted, but the main goal above all else is to save Jennifer. I like that the game never loses sight of that, and it helps that they're a really cute couple that you want to have a happy ending. One of my favorite parts is how much they expand upon the original arcade title and how most of our questions are answered over the course of the game. Some examples include the origins of the mask, how Rick found it, or maybe how it found Rick, the reason why Rick and Jennifer arrive at the mansion, and why Dr. West is doing what he does. These are points the original would have glossed over at best, but this game really fleshes things out, and it's all the more impactful because of it. One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the story is presented in flashbacks and through dialogue within levels, so some of it might come off as missable or even a bit confusing. Let's talk about the cast, because we got some real A-listers here. Jim Cummings is the voice of the Terror Mask, and he is the star of the show. He is both hilarious and incredibly demented all at once, and his lines are some of the best in the game. Whether it's abusing/helping Rick, getting poetic about mass murder, or even just breaking the fourth wall.
Jesus, Rick, get it together. I asked you to trust me. First sight of blood and you're crying like a schoolgirl. For a dick, you are such a pussy. There, all better now. They are everything, nothing. The many-angled ones. Thomas. They inhabit the abyss. What's said and what's understood. But look who's back. Show him why we call it Splatterhouse.
Josh Keaton plays Rick Taylor, and he does a fantastic job too. He conveys a spectrum of emotions, and you can really feel his struggle between being resistant towards this power he's been given, or fully embracing it to save Jen. Speaking of which, I really like who they got for Jennifer, and I dig the approach and voice for Dr. West. So let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this video, and talk about the gameplay. Just in the general sense, it's your usual character action game. You have your light and heavy attacks with X and Y, which you can charge by the way. Right bumper is your block and roll, a grab which is serviceable, and of course a jump button for attacking foes in the air and for some platforming. You have a sprint with the right trigger, which I mainly use for certain obstacles, but it is useful for some enemies. As you fight and kill, you'll fill up a blood meter under your health bar, and this has a number of uses. By holding the left trigger and pressing the face buttons, you'll utilize the power of the mask, which can range from blades which will slice through multiple enemies, a slam attack, and a healing move which is the most useful to pull off. When the meter is full, you can activate a berserk mode, which is cool, but you'll just forget you'll have it most of the time. Outside of the beginning of the game, you'll rarely find yourself needing to use it. Maybe for a boss, I guess, but I'd rather save the meter to heal instead of using it to get extra jacked up. More than I already am. If Splatterhouse is known for one thing, it's for weapons, and man do we have a selection. You have your melee options like a meat cleaver, lead pipe, and a trusty 2x4. Thing is, the swing leaves you open to get pummeled, so be cautious. Others include a shotgun and even a goddamn chainsaw. There's some weird ones like an enemy head and even your own fucking arm. The weapons are fun to mess around with, but I have my issues. Besides what I said before, they can break after a bit, so the enjoyment of using them doesn't last long. Plus it takes one monster to drop it from your hand, and it just sucks. After beating on an enemy, a red aura will appear, and that will allow you to perform a splatter kill, which is essentially a glorified fatality.
Fatality.
Piss off. You know, I actually should get to that series one day. These are cool to pull off, but it can get a little tiring seeing the same animations over and over again. You have ones like ripping off arms and heads, but you also have ones like Rick pulling out intestines through a monster's anus. Jeez. My favorite is taking off an entire torso. I would recommend doing these when you can, because you get a bit of health and some blood for the meter, but also some extra currency for upgrades. With blood you can buy the standard selection of new attacks, extra health, and related things like that. Don't know where to put this, but if you get lost you can press up on the D-pad and it'll lead you in the right direction. Sometimes it can be a bit confusing what it's trying to tell you, but it's only a minor hiccup. In short, what we have isn't the most dynamic combat system, but it is a satisfying one. You could be in a room with 9 creatures or 2 bosses, and it can be enjoyable tearing enemies to pieces. Don't get me wrong, it can get repetitive, but they do find ways to spice it up in levels, which I'll get into later. but for the most part I really enjoyed the gameplay. Now on to the other stuff. There's 12 levels in total, and these are enjoyable to travel through. Besides the mansion, you'll be exploring other areas like a meat factory, an evil amusement park, a destroyed New York City in the future, and even a mirror dimension, just to name a few. I like that we're not limited to just one location, and they have a way of explaining with these portals you travel through between levels. Within these stages, there are some things to note, like the puzzle elements that are sprinkled throughout, which can be creative. Whether it's launching baddies into spikes to open a door or feeding a giant mouth to pass through, they do have their moments and are a nice way of spicing up the combat scenarios. One addition I'm not a fan of are these platforming sequences. These were just poorly implemented and can be a nightmare to get through. Speaking of sequences, there are these 2D sections and I'm very mixed on these. They're a nice throwback to the original games, but the physics clearly don't work here. Just count how many times you make a jump that should be easy, but you still fuck up and die. I like the idea, but the execution needed some work. Like the fact the difficulty just ramps up dramatically, which is just jarring. I guess the only thing related to levels is the collectibles. There are these gramophones which give some insight into Dr. West, and these torn pictures of Jennifer scattered around. Besides getting a view, they give you some tidbits into their relationship, which is neat.
I swear to God, you put this on the internet and your ass is grass, Buster.
Outside of the story, there's some other stuff to look forward to. First up is the survival arenas, which is pretty self-explanatory. These are placed from certain set pieces from the campaign, and these are mainly here for blood to upgrade, and you can find additional gen picks. There are these written journals to look through, but by far the best unlockable is the original Splatterhouse trilogy you can play. They didn't need to include this, but it was a nice incentive for OG fans, and I can commend that. Graphics look okay. I like the comic book look and the creepy atmosphere to accompany it. Some animations can look a bit crude or just plain bad, but it doesn't impact much for me. Bosses are... well, there are a lot of repeats, mainly with the regular bunch, which gets old. The Poltergeist boss is okay, and the grand finale just plain fucking sucks. The best one by far is the fight against the Biggie Man. From the throwback at the start and being able to use one of his chainsaws against him is awesome. Music is great overall. You have a nice original score from Howard Drawson, which pumps me up immensely, and also a number of licensed music from Mastodon and Lamb of God, just to name a few. Overall, a nice mix of both, with my favorite tracks being the doll theme and the music for The Corrupted. It isn't available anymore, but there was DLC which included extra arenas and also extra masks you can wear. A couple are throwbacks to the original series, but there are some other designs which look really neat. There's also some console exclusive masks, and I like both. Xbox just has a literal console on his face, and the PS3 has this Japanese mythology looking one that just works. Before we end, there's one thing I need to bring up, and it's a little bit of a shame that I have to talk about this, but the bugs. I know this seems like a minor thing to talk about, but it gets to a point where it just becomes distracting. You got stuff like frame rate drops, audio hiccups. The one thing that this game is known for is the long load times, which is only an issue if you keep dying repeatedly in one spot and have to see this over and over and over again. I had this bug where the subtitles were stuck on the screen, and I was worried it would be like this through the whole recording session. So yeah, it is something to consider when playing this, and I wanted to bring it up at some point or another. So now to give my final thoughts. Sorry, just getting into the season. Splatterhouse 2010 is a solid time, and I would recommend a run-through at some point. From the gameplay to the story, the extras, as well as stuff like the music and the voice acting, this is an enjoyable game with a dismemberment and splatter. It has its problems with the glitches and that the game can become tedious, but more often than not it has more good qualities than bad. If this had a bit more time to be polished, we could have really had something stellar. But what we got was very commendable given its history, and I definitely would want to jump back into this soon. If you find this for the right price, then snag it for the collection. Giving it the old seal of approval, I guess. It's a shame that we'll most likely never see another game in this series again. especially with that cliffhanger of an ending, but I would love to see either a new game in the style of Streets of Rage 4 and Shredder's Revenge, or even a remake of this game. Apparently there was a patent for Splatterhouse Encore back in 2019, I think, and, you know, nothing ever materialized for that. The fact that there's still an audience with this game and this franchise brings me a ton of joy, so it gives me hope that someday we'll grab a 2x4 and do some fucking carpentry once more. Alright, I'm not beating around the bush anymore. I'm not making you guys wait another year or so. Next video is definitely going to be The Last of Us, so I hope everybody sticks around and tunes in for that. But before we do anything, let me just take this tight costume off. Wait, was that Jennifer? Should I do something? I mean, I got these printed on web shooters, so that's gonna do nothing. What am I gonna do?
She doesn't have to die.
Oh no, I know how this is gonna work, so you're not gonna fool me. On the other hand, John Cena body. Fuck it. What have I got to lose anyway?